Welcome and thank you for being here. I'm excited to introduce our speaker today. Caitlin Anderson is the Wellbeing and Workplace Environment Facilitator at Rocky Mountain Laboratories in Hamilton. We're thrilled to have her today. She spent many years with us in Extension, and we were sad to lose her, but happy to still be able to partner and bring her in to share her knowledge and wisdom around boundaries and accountability. So, Caitlin, thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So today's program, and oh goodness, where's my mouse? Today's program is on the establishing boundaries and accountability. And as Katie shared, it's just 20 minutes, and I feel like we're just going to barely scratch the surface on these two topics. And this is related to that conflict that comes up in our life. It's a normal part of our life and we're going to have it. And addressing and knowing those tools can help us better address the conflict that we have, whether it's in our position, whether it's with loved ones, whether it's with our neighbors, or maybe that board that you're serving on. So a little bit about me is that I went to the University of Wyoming and I was a field faculty member, as Katie shared, for Montana State University from 2006 to 2021. And in that role, I was the 4-H and family consumer science and community vitality was another program area that I dabbled in. And if you've worked with people before, you probably know, especially in Extension, we work with a lot of people and conflict comes up. And oftentimes we don't know how to address conflict because it's from our previous situations and our previous things that were modeled to us. And it also comes down to our personality and the things that we value. Um, so Katie has developed this Big Sky, Big Leadership to Go series, and there's so many different little facets that help contribute to understanding ourselves. And I'm going to shout out some other webinars that kind of delve into that information a little bit further. So if there's a topic that we should explore further after this, let us know as well. So I now work for the National Institute of Health, and I'm the Wellbeing and Workplace Environment Facilitator. And one thing that I really needed to know a little bit more about was conflict resolution. I dealt with it a lot in our positions as an extension agent, and I really wanted to make sure I had the right tools. And so this last December, I graduated with a conflict resolution certificate. And for those who want to know more about it, I'm happy to share. It was a really long journey, but something that was good. A little bit about me is that I'm solution oriented. I'm a people collaborator. I'm a book lover, and I'm going to be giving you lots of books to keep on reading on your night time reading list. And I'm also a believer in self-care. So why I'm telling you that is that that's part of my positionality in the world. That's how I come to the table. That's what I think about when I deal with situations is I think about how can we make this better through that solution oriented lens? How can we collaborate with people better and who's not at the table that needs to be? Um, so sometimes I do get into the weeds because I want to make sure that we get all of our words out. And so that's where that perspective comes from. I bet that I probably annoyed people before with the need to really dig in a little bit further. And you've probably seen this image in some form or fashion that depending on where you're looking at that situation and our past and our identities and our access to society with that positionality, you're going to look at it whether it's going to be a 6 or a 9. And depending on where you're at, both can be true, even though they seem like polar opposites. So when you're thinking through the next few slides, I want you to think about a situation. I'm just going to give you a few moments. I want you to keep a situation that you've been struggling with, not a big one, like where it's a lot of angst and it's gone off the rails, but maybe a situation that has been eating at you. And we're going to refer back to that situation throughout the next 20 minutes. Just keep it in mind. No need to share it in the chat. Just think about it. And as you think about that situation, I want you to think about how it shows up in you. Is it something that you dream about at nights where it comes up in these conflict situations? Is it coming up when you have a moment to think about something other than, what's in front of you and it keeps tickling in your mind? Or is it something that you're trying to really avoid? So I just want you to think about that. Now we're going to go into the model for a conflict analysis. And you may have seen this if you watched the Trust and Cohesion on team building this last fall. So this is a model of all of the different elements of conflict. And at the heart of this triangle is the relationship. The reason why we're having conflict with somebody else or something else or an organization is that you have some sort of investment with that person, that organization, whoever it is. You have a relationship with them that is important. Meaning you can't walk away. So thinking about that neighbor, you have a shared fence line and it's important to you. Now, you may not have to be besties, but you have a common interest and there's some sort of relationship that you probably want to preserve because at the peak of this triangle is that you have a shared interest. And what goes into it is those three P's. There's power, which is either a position or a resource or perceived control, and that lays into this trust and safety. There's also this pride. Everybody wants to have respect and feel that respect from somebody else. And so sometimes we'll save face or we'll try to save face for somebody else because we all have that ego that's a part of us and our identity. And then there's the final is this perception. And our perception is developed through the personal history with that individual and also the personality of how we show up, that demeanor, that attitude, that tone, and how you show up to those situations. So when you think about the situation that I asked you to imagine, think about how these four elements are a part of that conflict and maybe lean into what you haven't explored further. So since we're talking about accountability and boundaries, let's make sure that we're all on the same page and make sure we're using some similar words. So in terms of boundaries, I first heard about the term boundary probably about 8 to 10 years ago. And so when I first, started exploring the word boundaries, because we use it a lot, boundaries is something that indicates or fixes a limit or extent. A fence can be a boundary. Your time can be a boundary. But Dr. Brene Brown, in her book Dare to Lead, has a braving inventory that addresses boundaries. And she shares that setting boundaries is making clear what's okay and what's not okay and why. So in ourselves, when we show up to those situations, we have to be really aware of what we're willing to be okay with and what's not okay. And we'll talk even further about porous boundaries and rigid boundaries. So if this is something that's new to you, you may be saying, okay, I've heard the word boundaries, but what does that mean? So like I shared about 10 years ago, I started exploring boundaries and all I could come up were religious-based boundary books. And in the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years, several books have come out through licensed clinical social workers. And if this is the first time you've been with an extension program, we believe in providing non-biased research-based information, and we turn to the experts. And in this case, it would be a mental health provider. And so Nidra Glover Tawwab provided a book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, and it's a guide to reclaiming yourself. And she shares that there are 6 boundaries. There's physical boundaries, intellectual boundaries, emotional boundaries, sexual boundaries, time boundaries, and material boundaries. Depending on your situation that we came to mind at the beginning, think about what boundary may be missing. What boundary are you struggling with that you may not know that it is interfering or colliding with? Now, with boundaries, there is a prerequisite to providing that compassion and empathy to the people that we work with. And Brene shares that we can't connect with somebody unless we're clear about where we end and where they begin, where This is okay, this is not okay, and here's why. If there's no autonomy between people, then there's no compassion or empathy, just enmeshment. And she shares that we can't fully take care of ourselves, that self-care, if we're not expressing where our boundaries are. Because what's happening is that we're constantly questioning where we stand and where the other person stands. Additionally to these personal boundaries, we have to be aware of what is healthy and what's good, or are we too rigid or are we too porous? So in this situation, this example is on personal boundaries. And so if it's healthy if you value your own opinions, but if you push back and say, I don't want to listen to yours, that you may be too rigid. Now, if you are maybe oversharing information or constantly changing where you stand, then it may be too porous. And this is where I say, think about those professionals that you might need to tap into. It could be a supervisor, it could be a coworker, but there's also professional resources such as a mental health provider, your employee assistance program, and even your a personal mental health provider outside of the EAP program, or a coach to help talk about what your boundaries look like. Because often it's because of our past that we are acting in a certain way or we have certain thoughts around boundaries. But knowing our boundaries is how we can show up better in the world. Next, I have the description of accountability. So accountability is an obligation or a willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. And Dr. Brene shares in Dare to Lead is that this is your own owning your own mistakes and apologizing and making amends. Now, the opposite of accountability is blaming. How does blaming come up? Well, let's talk about that neighbor with a shared fence line and the weeds are always coming over. Now, you could blame and say, man, they never take care of their weeds. They never mow. And now I've got, animals coming from them or, whatever the situation. Have you talked to the neighbor about those concerns? Have you said, hey, how can we go about this? Or are you just blaming the other person? In Brene's book, I had already shared Dare to Lead. This one is Daring Greatly. Blame has an inverse relationship with an accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. Blaming is one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. And we could go into accountability and empathy and boundaries for probably all day if we wanted to. If these terms are new to you, take the path that sounds the most sense to you, whether it's picking up that book or starting to work with a mental health provider. These can help you understand your boundaries and how you show up in the world and how you take accountability for your actions and how you work with others. So how can we learn more about how we show up in the world? First, I think we need to understand our values. And Mandy Reed, she presented about a year ago in the Big Sky Big Leadership on values, and she uses some value cards from the Leadership Challenge. And understanding where our values are, it helps us be better leaders because when we understand our values, we can model them. It's important though to understand your values and then share them, not just keep them inside you, but share them. It could sound like, hey, my family is really important to me and I need this meeting to end at 8 p.m. tonight. This conversation is really important to me, but sleep is, I've got a big presentation, so I can't talk to you right now. Can we connect later? So not just stating that within ourselves, but sharing that and connecting that with the other person. And together you have those common grounds because you can share your values, you can hear their values, and you can work better together. And making sure that your values align with where you're spending your time and your energy. We all have the choice to stay in the situations that we are in, whether it's our career, whether it's in our volunteer work, whether it's in our neighborhood with that shared fence line. You could choose to make a choice. And by following through with what you're going to say is how you can model that way with your values. Next, I'd like to show or share with you our actions. Now, if this looks a little bit new to you, you may not have been learned about Real Colors personality. I am one of the facilitators of the Real Color personality assessments, and a lot of extension agents with Montana State University is as well. And so this is something that I can bring to the workforce if you are part of the NIH or if you are in the community. You can reach out to an extension agent and they'd be able to provide you with this training of Real Colors. But looking at this slide, this is what the Real Colors personality assessment shares, that our personality may show up when we are under stress. And each of these colors represent a different personality type. And for example, it's probably no surprise to those who know me and know Real Colors that I'm a blue. And so the things that kind of trigger me is that when I disappoint others, when I notice unfairness, when I interact with rude people, conflict, but I feel better now that I know the tools about conflict, or if there's excessive pessimism, or if I feel like I'm being taken for granted. Now, having some boundaries around how I want to show up or how I interact with those people can help me be a better person. And going into this next slide is understanding with our words. We show up with our body language. We show up by our words. And it's important that when you think about maybe that difficult conversation that you're going to have that I asked you to think about, when you think about maybe some of the things that you're willing to say and not say, what you're willing to go and not go, can help you better show up and be accountable with those boundaries in that situation. Because have you ever said yes to something when you should have said no? I hope I'm not the only one who's ever said yes when I know that I had 10 million things on my plate and I should have said no. Because what happens? I know for me, I get resentful. I start to blame because I think about all the things around me. But when I realize that when I said yes, I had to say no to something else, that's where that reflection piece comes into. In order for me to say yes to this situation, I had to say no to something else. And I first realized this when Brene shares in one of her webinars of someone asked her to make brownies for the PTA. And so she said yes. She should have said no, because what happened was that she was stressed to make these brownies. And when she showed up, she just threw the brownies on the table for the PTA. She's a great storyteller. I'm like not giving the best example. But what happened and what she learned was I avoided a difficult situation and felt uncomfortable saying no. And what happened is that it grew into resentment and I didn't show up in the best way that I wanted to be. So here's some questions for that self-reflection. Does the organization that I volunteer with, work with, partner with, fill in the blank, align with my values? In order for me to say yes, what am I saying no to? Am I showing up, such as in my actions or my words, the way that I want to show up, such as in my intention? Am I avoiding a difficult conversation, reducing that discomfort, and then become resentful by blaming others and not taking that accountability? And am I communicating my needs? So here are some additional books. Like I told you, I'm a book lover. Here's some additional books that you can learn more about yourself. Gretchen Rubin, she's written several books, but this one is about the four tendencies and understanding kind of almost how to hack yourself of, like, this is how I usually show up. So for me, I'm accountable to other people. And so on the flip side, what I try to do is I put boundaries around myself. So if it's a project and it's not impacting anybody but myself, I create boundaries by saying, hey, Katie, I'm going to get you a rough draft by next Friday. And Katie could probably care less, but I, it helps me keep that accountability to someone other than myself because I've shared it with somebody. Also, the real colors, and then the 7 habits of highly effective people. That one's a older book, but it has some very good wisdom in there to really understand yourself. And finally, this is the last slide until the resources I'm going over a little bit. I'm sorry, Katie, is to remember to be true to yourself. So there is something that we can do is that when you realize that maybe that boundary is being crossed and the person is not listening to it, or maybe you're not expressing it well enough, here's some words to help you remember and start that conversation. So let's imagine that you have a friend that stops by all the time and doesn't check in with you before coming over. It could also be the in-laws. So I need you to let me know when you're coming over. If you're not able to let me know, I'm going to have to not answer the door. Now, that sounds really simple and easy to say, but by saying, I need this from you, and these are the consequences that are going to happen, it helps set that boundary between that person who may be not listening to the boundary that you're providing. It's also important to remember that not setting a boundary is these are examples that it's not a boundary, but trying to control somebody by pushing someone to think or be like you, by managing areas of someone else's life that has no impact on you, such as minding your own business, determining what another person can or cannot do with their life, demanding that people change for you, and manipulating people into changing their behaviors. These are, this is no longer a boundary about you, but maybe is leaning into that controlling. And if you're noticing that, please lean into those resources and seek support from professionals. And on the slide deck is a bunch of resources and then our final slide with uh, next Tuesday's program. So with that, we can start answering questions, and I'm going to exit out of this the PowerPoint. There we go.
Wonderful. Thanks, Caitlin. A lot of food for thought, a lot of resources. That's wonderful. And a lot of questions. So uh, I'm gonna jump right in.
Yeah.
A question about how to set boundaries, how we set boundaries to bias and microaggressions, and how we deal with potential use of blame to reinforce structural racism. We'll just start with a softball.
The first thing that comes to mind is I think about who has the authority in that space. So let's say it is happening at a board meeting. And so that's when I may go and talk to the chair. Now, if it's the chair of that committee and they're the ones doing it, that's where maybe you have this conversation and maybe you might even need to have a mediator. And that mediator may be somebody who has power over the board itself, or it could be someone who's neutral, like an ombudsman, depending on the situation, whether it's with the university or with your workplace. There may be resources that you may not know that are there to help be that mediator. If it's in the community, I think it would be important to realize what are the choices I have? Can I choose not to maybe go to that business? Can I choose not to show up to that meeting? Can I use my energy and volunteer with another organization? So it's an answer, but not really an answer. There's a
Yeah,
lot that goes into it.
a lot of complexity, lot of context.
I think what's important is what's going to be true to you. Where's your boundaries?
Another question along those lines, maintaining our values in an environment that does not see cultural differences. Any thoughts there? How folks might maintain those values and that alignment?
Hmm. That's where it can be really a challenge because if it's in a workplace, you know that you're getting a paycheck, and those paycheck help us live and help us be our true selves. Um, I think that's where how can education be brought into the fold? It may be something that they're bringing to the table that they may not know that where their positionality is in the world. Bring in those people of leadership of helping to um, change that structure. And then there's also that decision of, is this worth it for me? And that's where we're seeing in our younger generations, where they're seeing that does my work align with the organization that I'm working for, and choosing to go different routes.
Great. Great. Another question kind of on this idea of power. Finding it particularly challenged to set and communicate boundaries to people in positions of power, such as administration, bosses, county commissioners, etc. Any
Mhm.
tips on how to navigate this, particularly when it's a new relationship?
Mm, that can be really hard. As I shared, I'm a blue. Um, I'm a people person. And so in conflict, that's actually something that we encourage people to lean into is through storytelling, through the arts of learning to get to know the other person. So if maybe it's a new, let's think about that, a new county commissioner. Maybe take a time to get to know that person as a person so that we can start to humanize each other. They may see you as an outsider coming into their community and seeing someone as new, and you're going to change everything, and they don't like change, and so you equal change. But by maybe sitting down and realizing that you have a shared interest of whether it's books or if it's art or if it's about ag or raising chickens, whatever it is, you can find that common interest and that commonality, and they start to see someone as a person, and you can slowly start to build that relationship. Once again, I feel like these are really deep questions and we could spend all day talking about them, but that's where talking to maybe an ombudsman, maybe coaches or executive coaches or mental health providers can help you work through some of these big challenges in our, because this is big.
Mhm.
This impacts us.
Yeah. Great. Well, I know there's a few more questions. I apologize we didn't get to those. It is the top of the hour. I just put my email in the chat. This is a new discussion and we're happy to continue it. Don't hesitate to send some questions our way. We will be back here next Tuesday at 8:30. Allison Brennan will be talking about managing stress and anxiety. So, continuing the conversation, thank you for being here. Caitlin, thank you stepping into a hot seat. This is a complex and challenging topic, and so appreciative of having your expertise and knowledge in
Yeah.
this. So thank you for being here, and thank you all. We hope to see you next week.
And I put my email in the chat if someone wanted
Great,
to follow up.
great. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.